the thing that you need for it to be a success is the buy-in of the leaders, right? Leaders go first, and they need to show by example.
Hey, welcome to 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. We're a father-son leadership podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems. And you know what? I'm fired up. I had a double whammy this afternoon. So I got to talk to a group, and I'll give a shout out to my buddy Rob Raven and his group that I'm a part of, Achieve Systems. And I was talking with his current Achieve You group about leadership and helping them understand the importance of leadership and growing their business. And I had a blast doing that. And then here comes the double whammy, Camden, is I got to talk to Uncle Ben for the whole drive back from Denver down here. And, you know, every time we talk with, I get to talk with my best friend, Ben, Camden's Uncle Ben. It's always fun and brings back so many memories of throwing darts at each other and shooting BB guns and getting in trouble with the dogs, you know, all those sort of things. None of that stuff that you did, Camden, because you were a good kid, right?
Yes, sir. None of that. Definitely didn't take any of those stories and then go replicate it with my buddies Seth and Liam. You don't know anything about that. But I was going to say, what's your project list looking like? Did y'all talk long enough that you've got 5 or 6 new projects for down at the ranch, or what are we talking there?
We were actually talking about end of life.
Ooh.
How about that? Yeah. Setting up trusts, inheritance. You ain't getting none.
Fair enough.
That was the decision that Ben and I made. But yeah, that was literally what we were talking about. And what's the legacy that we want to create? And when I think of legacy, I think of some of the things that our good friend Kendall Wallace is joining us and what you're doing. Because when I think of this retreat, the retreats that you're organizing and running, I think how that's creating a different kind of legacy, right? So there's the personal legacy, but then there's this legacy from that impact of that retreat and how that carries on. Could you just share with us a tad about how that 3 or 4 days retreat just has this tail of an effect for the people that come out and join you?
Sure, yeah, happy to. So I've led retreats where individuals sign up, and then I've also led retreats with corporations. So, I mean, what's super interesting about both? I mean, quite frankly, I'll speak on the individual basis first. Is I created these individual retreats coming out of the pandemic, actually, that were just nourishing for people to create community together and really up level in this environment where they'd be nourished mind, body, soul, and actually out here in Hawaii where I live. And people
not a bad place for a retreat. In your backyard.
Not a bad place, no. And one of the key components, I think, of really having an impactful experience together is creating the opportunity for each person to shine, and then each person to be humbled, honestly. And so to kind of create that level playing field. So people really connected so deeply. I mean, some even lived together for like 6 months after. I mean, I was just mind boggled by the level of connection that came out of that I thought, oh, wow, there's a real opportunity to create something similar for this out of the team experiences. And what's cool is to create something that's really memorable and actually enjoyable. You know how often, like in corporations, we have stuff that checks a box that's like, okay, we did the team building, but it's just like kind of surface and BS. I hate that.
The trust fall. You gotta do the trust fall, right?
Yeah, but only if the trust fall is like actually, teed up well and people are actually bought in. They're not kind of like rolling their eyes, and trust fall actually works. There's a reason it's been around, it's I'm all about creating experiences that are going to move the needle on like how teammates work together 2 weeks down the road. I think that's the impactful experiences that I create and I'm interested in creating because who wants to have an experience where it's just like why did we do that and that level of team building, it doesn't really work.
Talking about the impact for the individuals, and one of the things that comes to mind with a retreat is that what people get out of it, you can't really dictate that much because it's so much of almost this like mirror of whatever they're looking for, whatever they're dealing with, they're going to see and they're going to find along the way, and that's kind of their individual impact. That works on the individual level. How do you make that work in the more corporate environment? Tribe and Purpose calls you and says, hey, I need Otis to pay more attention to work and be more connected. That's my goal for him. Now you're kind of working where it's not necessarily just that mirror where you give people this experience and they get to learn from it. You kind of are catering it a little bit more. Could you talk some about that?
Yeah, so wait, repeat your question one more time. Sorry, I'm not sure.
Of taking the individuals where, it's basically kind of, you can be more open with it, basically, because it's kind of they're going in for their own individual purposes rather than going in behind basically, what their boss is trying to get out of it, to put it more bluntly.
Well, that's the thing is it's really important to design for those hierarchies that are in place. And yeah, absolutely. You touched on a point that like when individuals sign up, it truly is of their own accord. You have the 100% dedication because it's their own money. And that's something that, yeah, I definitely have to combat at times is, hey, we're gonna do these these exercises, these activities, and that's where to be honest with you, it can it's important to incorporate like these awe-inspiring experiences, like going for sunrise hikes, like going for sunsets, like things that are actually enjoyable, that you get the buy-in, that it's actually not just lame. For lack of a better word, right? That it's something that's actually enjoyable. Oh, and by the way, you're with your colleagues. And to the point about hierarchy, though, it's something absolutely 100% got to design for. And so that's why in the intake of all of my retreats and offsites, I do my due diligence of sending out a survey and having everybody respond, of doing in-depth interviews with a handful of individuals to understand the kind of inner workings of how the team actually operates. And it's through that I just had an example recently where I led an offsite, and it was a team that was subdivided into three, like a department that was subdivided into three unique teams. And everybody in my snowball sampling really kind of talked about how the challenges of a few individuals. And so it's really like knowing the inner workings of kind of how the team operates going into the offsite, so that I can create and design exercises to fulfill exactly what those problems might be, what needs to be addressed.
I need you to help me because I have an image right now.
Go ahead.
And unfortunately, it's not an image of me and Miss Suzanne sitting on the beach, Waikiki Beach together. That should be the image. But the image I have is something you said earlier. In my translation, this is why I have the image, is you tear them down and then you build them up. Can you give us, because that's the military way, right? That's why the haircuts, the uniform, all those sort of things. I'm going to guess it's probably not as drastic as my memories of that sort of thing is. Could you walk us through a little bit of the process, please?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's interesting you mentioned, obviously you being a Green Beret, like one of the, in all the team building books, it's so funny too, because one of the exercises that is the greatest is that log exercise. Did you guys do that?
Oh, yeah.
You must have.
And the logs were heavier back then too.
Yeah.
Right.
Multiple times and multiple variations, Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the kind of challenge I have, I would love to do that long exercise, but I haven't gotten approval from HRs yet to be able to do that. There's also, actually having people do ice baths. That's another one that's been a tricky one to get approved. In some larger companies. But in essence of the kind of breaking them down, if you will, I design each offsite and retreat based on what problems needed, and so needed to be addressed. And so, like an example, I there was a engineering department that I designed, that had a group of about 70 and all these different product teams, and they innately compete against each other, right? They're all in the engineering org, but unfortunately when you have these different product teams, they compete for resources, need, headcount. And so I designed an exercise specifically to create that competitive spirit and have them inadvertently compete against each other. So it mimicked the way they operated in real life. And then we could have a really, I guess that so that's where they were kind of already in their element of how they operate. And then we piggybacked though that exercise with a really in-depth integration and debrief of like gut checking how it is that they operated and that competition, and then having each of them leave with okay, what are their takeaways on how that exercise reflects how they work and what's not serving them, and what are they committed to then um, to doing or not doing going forward. And that was a really interesting experience. So it's exercises like that, and then honestly, I think one of the best things I wouldn't really call it wear them down, but is creating the opportunity for real talk. Like when there's conflict within a team, being able to actually create the safe space so that people can talk about what their challenges are. And I think that empathy exercise can be really impactful. I mean, I've seen tears, and hugs and those types of things to happen during that exercise because of how powerful it can be to bring people together. And I think just creating the honest space is so vital, because how often do we walk on eggshells and not say how we truly feel in the workplace because we have to comport ourselves a certain way.
Is there, in your opinion, I'm not sure there's necessarily an answer here, but is there a need to kind of have that mechanism of breaking down, wearing down? Not necessarily, the physical stuff. There's all sorts of different ways I'm sure that mechanism can kind of manifest itself in a retreat. But do you think that mechanism is necessary to, kind of take people down those few pegs in order to get to the, end goal of what you're working on?
I think in essence, people don't leave places that they have deep and meaningful connections. And, we've seen time and again where meaningful work and, enjoying, you know, your employee engagement rates, et cetera, is really tied to having meaningful relationships in the workplace. And so I think in order to obtain and actually have real meaningful relationships in the workplace, that, trust is paramount. Trust and being honest and empathy with one another is paramount. So it's really about creating the context for those conversations to happen, for people to trust each other. I mean, even there was this I forget if it's a Forbes article. I'll send it to you guys afterwards. But just talking about how, in essence, the impact of trust, and companies that um, had high trust among its employees and managers actually, outperformed the S&P 500 by um, by like 40% or something like that. It was just like a lot more. And it's just, there's a high correlation there that is not to be ignored. And plus, it's also makes an enjoyable workplace. Like you look at the level of trust you two have, obviously father and son, but it's just, you work at the relationship too from the way you guys communicate. And, it's kind of almost like what you guys mentioned in one of your previous episodes around like taking the opportunity for to have iron out conflict when it's still small before it gets too big. And some people take their own initiative with that and others don't. And that's why, at the bare minimum, creating an opportunity for in-person exchange when you're building the relationships, if that's the problem of the team, if that's a problem of the team, then it's utilizing that in-person time effectively to build on that.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, communications is such a key element, and being able to talk back and forth, and helping those individuals who've never been in an environment like that their entire life realize that this environment, yeah, it's expected. It's not okay. It's expected. If something ain't right, then tell us, right? If something's festering, then let's talk
Right.
about it. Don't let it boil up. Uh, one of the things I'm really curious about, and you touched on it. Have you seen data? Is there data for teams that have come to the retreat and the what's the damn word? Longevity is not the right word. There's an employment word where you're keeping the people around. Uh, there's a yeah
Retention.
retention.
There
There
we
we go.
go.
There we go. Yep. Okay, it is getting late in the day. My vocabulary is all used up. But in that retention, have you seen that? Have you been able to get data from clients that says, "Hey, we were there, and man, we're still 100% from 4 years ago when we did this."
Right. Yeah. Well, our business has only been in operation for about 2 years, so we don't have data for years and years yet. But I think, I mean, certainly we do the survey at the outset and then afterwards, and survey even a few months later. And certainly, we have seen from what we've received already, yes, and absolutely an improvement. I think with one of our clients recently, it was like an 8% improvement for that particular question on how long they intend to stay at the company. But yeah, there's other studies out there. I'll have to look up and send.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think for sure it's an impact. Camden, I had a question for you around like since you're a coach, like, does this come up around in your the athletes that you coach around, the challenges, and how do you kind of coach your team to be able to address those?
Yeah, I think there's, and Pat, I think you and I might have talked about this on an episode before, kind of joking about like the value of like push-ups and those type of things. There's this really good thing about sports, which is where like the physical punishment kind of contributes to the goal because you need to be in shape in order to win games and that kind of thing. But then at the same time, because you have the coach who's kind of pushing the punishment down on you, it also kind of pushes people together that way. It gives them the enemy to not like for that day of being the coach and kind of stepping up being that. So honestly, I think handling that challenge is relatively simple inside the sporting environment because it is kind of inherent to it that you can have those type of actions where you quite literally tear people down. Like we do something with the U of A that we call our Savage Saturdays, where we go out and it's at like 6 a.m. They go out, they just do crazy workouts. It's nothing too crazy, but it's just this extra thing of like, we're all going to go there. It's going to suck for all of you guys. And that's how you bring people together. It is that. And that's why I asked about, do you think it's necessary to tear them down? Because that's one of those areas, sports and business, there's so many similarities in the leadership aspects, but that's one where business falls short. I can't just go make them run. I can't, Dad, I made fun of you. It's like, you can't just go ship your team off to the mountains for months at a time and come back and be like, hey, now they're working like a Green Beret team. There's a gap there to some extent. Yeah. So I'd be curious what your experience is kind of trying to bridge that gap somehow.
Well, I was going to say that's one of the beauty of bringing in a third party facilitator is because we can do things that that maybe if you're an employee facilitating, or you're day in day out with having to work with these individuals, that you can't necessarily do. Like, for example, Priya Parker in her book Art of Gathering talks about facilitating a example where there was a team that really needed to like actually communicate with each other and be not as much a slave to kind of the day to day. Like they had this time for an offsite, and they kept basically during the breaks, like doing their, trying to hop on calls and stuff like that. And she actually instituted having people do push-ups for whoever was late. Like they had to do push-ups at the front of the room. And so then by the end though, people didn't show up late for once the break was over, they didn't. And I think that's fun. Like it's fun to be able to integrate these kind of I've done capture the flag several times too, and you should see the camaraderie that gets built on that, but also the competitiveness. That's pretty hilarious. It's funny. My mentor has actually been like, you really got to stop doing these capture the flag, because we're adults now and people can get injured. But I'm like, but it's fun to have that, that collegiality that gets accompanied with sports.
Talking about that mechanism there, and trying to fit into the different areas. One of the other things that I think is really difficult inside of the business is being able to measure the impact of those different mechanisms. Could you talk some, and like you said, it's not like you have this whole pile of data, but just maybe just conceptually of what are things that you can look for that are coming out of the retreat, some of those long lasting impacts.
Yeah, that's really good. I actually was at this conference last week, the Running Remote conference in Lisbon. That was the largest gathering of distributed workforce experts in the world. And we got on this topic of metrics. And, obviously employee engagement, employee satisfaction, to your point, Otis, like employee retention, employee retention plays a part with employee engagement and satisfaction. How long people intend to stay. I mean, these are all things that are important to chief people officers and as a KPI. But one of the things, but then and it's interesting because in this whole remote versus, should companies be remote or should they be in office or hybrid? We were talking about making the argument for remote, and it's like this whole legacy, basically people that have been working in an office for their entire lives, believe that, you got to go into the office. And so, like employee satisfaction on that topic doesn't really help. It's because you basically have the legacy employees that want to go in the office and newer ones that want to be remote. And so that's not the metric to look at. And we talked about how really, if you can utilize profitability and show the correlation there, like that's bar none the best metric available. There's some studies I can point to, but yeah, like I don't have that data yet. So instead, what I've been using is really employee engagement and measuring that effectively before and after these experiences. And also, like there's other metrics too, like that we can measure around, like how often or how well people bring up like own their own mistakes. How teams actually look each other in the eye. How often like teams actually communicate to the person asking the question or specifically the manager versus the rest of their peers in a group. Like all of these things can actually be measured, which is also an interesting thing because mostly high performing teams have this correlation where they are ones that look each other in the eye. They are ones that look everybody around in the table, not just the leader. And so I think those also offer just interesting metrics to look at that signal, how well teams operate and trust one another. And but it seems like if we can figure out a way to tie that to profitability, that's obviously the surefire way to make this all work.
That's right. Yeah, if you could quantify leadership and teamwork and do a direct correlation to the bottom line. Boy, I think
Yeah.
I think you might be a little bit busier than you are right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And it's funny too, because I mean, I'll be the first to share too. I worked in big tech. I worked for Meta, and even at a company that was like printing money too. It had its challenges with this though. With there was a lot of internal team switching, and people just kind of basically switching teams instead of actually going through and communicating when there were objections, and creating that team alignment. So in that case too, it's not exactly correlated, which is a frustrating aspect, I think.
Yeah, and the way you were describing it sounds like, Joe's not happy on Team A, so he manages to get transferred over to Team C. One of the things that is a problem in the military, in a lot of organizations, truthfully, not just the military, is leaders aren't willing to make the hard choice and line the person up and say, "Hey, that's it, man. You've screwed it up. I've set you up. I've prepared you, and you screwed it up again and again. Now it's time for you to go find another fit for you in another company, because this is not the fit for you." Uh, which circles me back around to the question I had. Is one of the things that I've found over the years of coaching, particularly individuals, not necessarily group coaching, doesn't come out too often, but definitely with individuals, is every so often the individual through coaching realizes, holy crap, I ain't in the right place, sort of thing. Have you had that happen with a company or a group? And how'd you handle it?
I haven't had that happen yet, to be honest with you.
Ah,
I'll be perfectly honest with you. Yeah, it
yeah.
hasn't come up yet. Um,
Well, let that
but
be a warning for you then.
yeah, yeah. I will say, though, if I can comment on your other point around accountability, uh, from military, like the accountability, those hard conversations, it was so fascinating recently. Led an offsite, and the data of the survey supported. Basically, I followed Patrick Lencioni, which he talks about the five dysfunctions of a team, and I follow his rubric and have integrated his questions into my intake, so that I can see from the outset, in the initial survey, as everybody responds, what they want to get out of the experience, but also I can identify from the outset which of the five dysfunctions is most apparent. And then I also did a snowball sampling of these different teammates, and it was so fascinating because there were three different levels, I guess. And the director of even the director of this whole department actually commented that it was the behavior of two individuals that was really creating a lot of negative energy within the department, and that was reiterated by the survey as well as the interviews. And it was so funny though, because okay, accountability is the biggest issue. There's a great exercise to implement that actually, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with it, but one piece of feedback positive, one piece of feedback negative, we're all in a circle, you go around, super simple, right, and super lightweight. However, the thing that you need for it to be a success is the buy-in of the leaders, right? Leaders go first, and they need to show by example and embody the way to receive feedback, which without defensiveness, etc. And so, just the moment I kind of said, "Hey, here's this opportunity to address this egregious problem that you guys have all mentioned," um, and it's very evident. And it was so fascinating because that particular leader thought about it, and I made the mistake of telling the leader about it 2 days before the actual offsite, and then the next day, just like, I think that might be a little much, and it's like, yes, of course, because literally the problem is accountability. The problem is accountability, and here's your opportunity to create accountability for your team. Here it is on a little like silver platter for you. And
Nah,
yet,
that doesn't work for me.
no. And it was fascinating. It's like, it's so fascinating, even when, an expert on creating gatherings comes in, and it's just like, here you are. But no, and it's fascinating too, because that's also been a journey, you know uh, for myself too. I'll speak authentically, like, guiding certain people that are 20 years my senior has been an interesting self-growth moment for me. It's an interesting thing. Yeah.
With that, I'd be curious to know, talking about the. Actually, no, I'm going to change my question. Sorry. Going to change it up
Go
on
for
it.
it.
So, talking about, making that connection, we already kind of joked of, the push-ups in business and, trying to make those connections, take those lessons learned in these other fields and applying them across. What is the everyday lesson from a retreat? It's because they can't, you can't have everybody there for the sunrise hike every Monday. That doesn't quite work. What are ways that you think you can kind of take some of these mechanisms and build them into a business so that, you can get some of these benefits without, necessarily making a trip out to Hawaii every 6 months as soon as the morale dips a little bit?
For sure. Yeah. And just so like the offsites, I travel wherever. It's not just Hawaii. But yes, I think the biggest thing to do is actually train managers on how to be effective at giving and receiving feedback. And then also how to and training them on how to empower empower their teams to remove roadblocks. It's kind of back to that manager versus leader question, I guess, in some regard. It's just, kind of, I think, when you've trained managers to kind of make sure that the project like reaches its full conclusion, there's not exactly the openness for individuals on that team to come to the managers with needing help to remove roadblocks. It's kind of like, oh, if I don't do exactly what I'm told, I'll get in trouble here. And I think unwinding that is going to make a huge difference within teams. And I think the other thing, quite frankly, this is my opinion, is picking up the phone when there's a challenge. I am a huge believer that written communication is the devil, but it creates a lot of miscommunications. The tonality is completely missing. It's very on Slack or whatever method people use, like even WhatsApp, sending a voice note if a phone call can be had, or a Loom video so you can hear the tonality of the voice, is a huge thing that I think can help mitigate misunderstandings in particular. And then, so basically the manager aspect, the tonality aspect, and then lastly, I think really creating alignment, but creating real alignment. like who here? There's this great tool actually. Who here? Like if you need to make a decision on something. Who here believes, out of 5 fingers, you can, if you're even, you can do this virtually or in person, out of 5 fingers, 3, a 4, only a 4 or 5 actually moves forward with the decision. The 3 or less means, I'm not so sure. But the responsibility is a conversation follow-up the next day. For those people 3 or less, okay, bring a different solution or bring a solution to the call. It's not just we're not just taking shots here. We're creating solutions to move forward so that the team can actually really dialogue and then commit. But you commit with everybody included, right? That's kind of the other challenge is when some people are left out of the conversation, and it's also something that almost like teeing up from the get go. I've seen companies do more and more is like, it's important that you show up for this conversation so that we can have complete alignment. And if you're not, like, you can't complain. Like it's kind of like, I've seen a requirement across the board of like, we discussed this last night with several companies now requiring those in attendance at the in-person retreats, and sometimes it's like, oh, you can go, or if you have these commitments or whatever, like you can't. But it's when you onboard people, like setting the expectations that it's a requirement. And quite frankly, it's such an important time to get to know your teammates, but then also minimize the conflict that could potentially be arose and align as a team. And so I think those are the other things, is just making a key distinction of like, you're expected to be here. And quite frankly, if you don't show up, like, you can't complain. Like, sorry.
Yeah. So I discovered that, well, actually, I didn't say I discovered that. I led that way back when I was a Green Beret, and particularly when I was in charge of larger organizations in Green Berets. And I said, silence is compliance. And silence is you're sitting there with your hands, sitting on your hands, not saying anything, or you're not showing up. And you know what? It's kind of like, you could extrapolate that to voting, right? Hey, if you didn't vote, then man, you ain't got a say on it, right? There's a great book called Leading Change by Cotter, and he talks about buy-in. And I read that many years after leading solutions the way I did, where absence or silence is compliance. It's really interesting, because that's what he talks about. In order to lead the change, you have to have the buy-in with the people and the team. And if the team members aren't there, they just voted by not being there, right? I mean, that's part of it. I think that's an interesting thought process that I think in this passive aggressive acceptance, and I had this conversation at lunch with some folks I gave the talk to, and we were talking about the cultures of organizations and how you have to watch really how you say certain things, and how to. Oh wait, I'm sorry. It wasn't. Man, I've talked to a lot of people in the last couple of days. It was actually at my veteran business leader mastermind last night, the VBLM.
Yes, sir.
And one of the members was talking about how a person came up to him and was asking him how things were going. And his comment was, well, I'm really busy. I'm working on blah, 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 blah. And the person's reply back to him was, wow, I'm really sorry you're busy. And we both kind of laughed. It's like, because, he's another Army guy. And he's like, I like what I'm doing. I want to be busy. I mean, if I'm not busy in my job, what am I doing here? And it brought up this whole passive aggressive culture. And it's not just now, it's always been this way, right? I mean, people are passive aggressive, and hell, I get that way with Miss Suzanne. She gets that way with me. Not that I would admit that publicly. Was that my outside voice again? We all tend to do that, and it doesn't solve any problems. How do you handle, because I'm sure you see it as soon as they show up, that passive aggressive relationships and those sort of personalities. How do you break into that and get them to start being more active, be an active aggression?
I mean, that's where how do I get people to be more engaged and be more themselves? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Just so yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's where I put on my coaching hat and just be honest, is hey, it seems like, you're a little disengaged here, or you're a little quiet. Like, is that because you're, what's that about? Basically, just asking the question. And then, yeah, I mean, I think, does that answer your question or no? I feel like
Yeah,
I'm
you're
not
close
answering.
enough. What the hell? I mean,
Yeah.
I'll be passing out the score sheet at the end of the show.
Yeah.
That's all I got to
I was
say.
gonna say,
Thanks.
I think that really goes back to something you were saying earlier, though, Kendall, of breaking down the barriers to the behavior that you want, and then you're going to help to get rid of behavior you don't want. If you don't want people to be passive aggressive, I guess you could talk about barriers to create barriers to prevent that kind of aggression. But then also, the real aggression, like you were joking about, Dad, that's just actually talking to somebody about their performance, giving that honest feedback and those kind of things. All that is really the reduction of the barrier, because the reason we're passive aggressive is because we don't want the confrontation of the aggression. When you remove the confrontation of the aggression, all of a sudden there's not as much need to be passive aggressive. I don't have to make a remark to Kendall after the podcast about something you said, Dad. I could just tell you on the podcast I didn't like what you said. It's like there's not a barrier there for the confrontation. And I don't know. I think that would probably be the way to help to get that passive aggression out.
And there's ways to do things playfully too. Like when when I'm facilitating in some offsites and teams need to create alignment, and there's different sides. Like there's different games we can play to bring play into the debate. And also really making sure to there was this executive leadership board I facilitated last year there that there were two individuals really kind of room of 20, two individuals like really creating the most of the debate. And so how that can be in a room. You're like, something, I gotta do something here to either, to create a shift. And, there's been opportunities where you can create it more like almost like a fight, like hey, get to your side, like we'll do rounds of the debate, right? And kind of people egging it on. But in that case, actually what I did was each time that those two spoke, they had to call on individuals that weren't speaking as much. And actually I tried to make it women on the board too, like as much as possible, because it was these two guys, kind of having this debate. So, I think there's interesting ways to be playful around it. And I guess the other thing I was going to mention too is just around, one of the things discussed at this running remote conference I was at. Shoot, I lost my train of thought for a second.
Welcome to the club.
Oh, I know, it happens. This sucks. I hate when it's live and you freaking lose it. It's like now I look like an idiot. Oh,
the trick there is you ask a different question instead of the one you forgot, because then it looks like you're really smart. You just changed your mind. Yeah, I did that about 20 minutes ago.
Okay, good. See, thanks for the tip. Yeah, see, this is the funny thing is this is how trust is created, right? This is how the collegiality is created. It's the vulnerability of and then kind of speaking to that, which is always fun.
I think there's an interesting piece on that. Sorry, Dad, I just want to jump on something there, because you talk about making it playful. This thing came to mind. I don't know. This is one of those, like, it's kind of social effect. I'm not sure if there's a name for it. Anything I've read about to some extent, but the idea of basically just like teasing and the kind of joking type things and how they play a really important role inside of our social groups a lot of the time. Of the instead of actually being full on confrontational about something, it can be a almost playful way of saying it, and you can get that point across in a much less confrontational way. And I think that's an interesting way of looking at it, of this, like, making it, almost adding the joke into it and those kind of things. But it's like, hey, Otis, you're talking too much this episode. That's funny. We're all going to laugh. And then Otis is going to get off this episode and be like, all right, now I probably need to dial it back about 5% at least. Because you kind of get those things. That's another way of kind of disarming that aggression a little bit, getting out of that confrontation.
And that's because you guys have an underlying agreement to be honest with one another. So sometimes, like the politeness is more the like the prerequisite as opposed to being honest with one another, like in the workplace. And so a lot of times I'll create a container, like, and that's what you do at the outset of these events together, is creating a container of kind of the rules of the road for this, for this engagement. And one of them is giving feedback, knowing, like, to up level the person. Like, it's all made, whether it's in jest or in direct confrontation, it's all made to up level one another and in a positive way.
I'd love to hear what it is or what happened, if you will, at Meta that sets you on this catalyst to, I need to do this retreat stuff.
Oh man, Otis, you asked the question of the hour. Well, I'll tell you the truth. I was fired. I was fired for not being a good teammate to my teammates. And, when something like that happens, take a darn hard, good look at yourself and what one can be responsible for. And I looked at it and I saw a pattern. There was a pattern of me not getting along with other strong-willed females on the team. Well, it was other colleagues, but they happened to be strong-willed females. And when I looked at that, it's very fascinating. Somebody asked me after the experience, okay, where in your life did you have someone telling you what to do, not listening to any of your thoughts, just like it was their way or the highway. And I was like, oh my God, is this all about my mom? Are we serious right now? And then I went down. Yeah, but here's the thing. That then sent me on this trajectory to actually do the continuing studies course at the Bowen Center for Family, where I identified that how the families we're brought up in actually play a role in how we comport ourselves in the workplace, and how different. And I saw opportunity after opportunity of how different it would have been had I had that conversation with her at the time, being like, this is what's playing out for me, because clearly I'm triggering something else in her. And so what was playing out for her? And then I really saw so many missed opportunities too, even at a company with so much funding. Like, we had communication classes, but we didn't have communication classes with the people we work directly with. Go figure. Not exactly helpful. So I just, I saw where there were just missed opportunities. And like, so often, like, instead of having real alignment, people would just switch teams. It's just what happened, or in my case, got fired, or in other cases, left, And so that's really, it was from this personal place that sent me down this road of like, it can be better. We spend so much time with people we work with. We might as well have damn good relationships, Otherwise, what are we doing? I just think it's seriously, what are we even doing? And so, yeah, that's where, and then I went in doing those individual retreats for individuals, and that bonded so much. I really saw such a tremendous opportunity to create something magical that also enhanced the safety and honesty of the teams and their team trust.
Oh, that's great. I appreciate you sharing that, because that's a great catalyst to hold the mirror up and just say, oh crap, you look around. I mean, I'm laughing because I'm thinking about some guys I know that are in like their fourth or fifth marriage. It's like, hey, dude, it might be you. It may not. It may, there might be something else going on there. But like, you're willing to change. That's the awesome part about it.
Oh, for sure. And how can we, here's the thing. How can we force people to actually look at their own patterning that might not be serving them, especially in the workplace? And it's like, people can do it of their own accord. They go to therapy, they get a coach, they do some personal development work. But for everybody else, and honestly, there's also all these aspects too of how they operate with it as a unit. And to be able to have those discussions as a team, that's what unite. That's the level of transparency that creates, teammateship. Yeah, that's what I care about.
No, that's awesome. I learned today because I wish I wouldn't have learned it, because once I learn it, then I have to do it. That I better ask HR if I'm going to do log drills or ice baths. Because when I've done, yeah, I know you kind of spoiled it for me, because I'm much more ask for forgiveness than permission sort of guy. So you've ruined it with that lesson, because I mean,
please don't. Please don't. They'll always say no. I never had. It's so funny. I now empathize so much with Michael Scott towards Toby. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
I've never empathized more so than when I tried to do an ice bath and HR shut it down. Don't let that be your takeaway, Otis, please.
Yeah. I know the retreat ran for the rugby team. The men's rugby team was. I didn't ask anybody. Coach said, "Hey, don't do too much of this and don't do too much of that." And I'm like, "Got it." And those limits were pretty much way out here. So, Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
Yeah, I think really, trying to tease out the mechanisms behind why retreats are successful and what you can get out of it, and kind of trying to understand what that really core mechanism is and how you can translate that into, a team outside of the retreat environment, I think was a really interesting thing. And the interesting thing that I feel like we kept coming back around to was the ability to break the pattern, remove these barriers and all those kind of things, where it's the less that you have, it's almost, here, I'm going to use an analogy to say this. When you have your perfect life, you don't need vacation, right? When you build a business with a good culture, you don't have those barriers. You don't need to go play capture the flag in order to reach that point where you could then have an honest conversation. You can just have the honest conversation because you have that culture. So I think that's a really interesting piece there, just how much it comes back to culture and the way you design your business.
Absolutely.
Kendall, how about you? What'd you learn?
I think it's one of the things you stated, that the military has problems of accountability too. I think that's one of the most surprising things. I haven't worked with the military yet. And to hear that from you was honestly something that will just be etched in my brain a bit and want to noodle on. Especially because we just have this expectation that the military is just it just operates so seamlessly, and it's just wow, there's even there where people have challenges of accountability.
That's so funny, because that's so true. It's almost, I feel like we, put on my civilian hat. I know growing up as an Army brat, not totally the same, but it is almost kind of this sometimes of look at that perfect organization, and they're just so efficient. And then every now and then it's oh, they're people. That's really important to remember. Yeah, they're all just people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. When we meet up for a beer in Waikiki, well, maybe pina coladas. I don't know. Maybe pina coladas.
Yeah.
I'll share some
Mai Tais.
Mai Tais. That's
Mai Tais. That's my beach drink. Oh yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Gotta have Mai Tais with my little umbrella. We'll have to talk a little bit more about some of those things and share some of that.
Some of those people being very human.
Yeah.
Right.
There's some that they probably shouldn't be human because they're a waste of oxygen. But hey, Kendall. Kendall, I want to know, and I want you to tell everybody how to get in touch with you, how to learn more about what you got going on, how to sign up for a retreat.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me at Kendall at executiveoffsites.com. The website is executiveoffsites.com. And you can also reach me on Instagram at corporate offsites. is the handle. And I offer a free consultation too for anybody a free 30-minute consultation for anybody who wants to have strategic advice and really think through what they're thinking for their next offsite or get together, or quite frankly, if they have team trust challenges or just whatever challenges their teams may be encountering. And then I do a free consult. So you can register for that by just emailing me at Kendall at executiveoffsites.com.
Awesome. Kendall, thank you again for taking some time out from surfing to spend it with us. Really appreciate you being here today.
Oh, it's been such a treat. Thank you guys so much. Yeah. And, at some point in the future, too, it'd be really fun to explore how you two and your family dynamic has also shaped you guys in the workplace, too. Maybe we could look at that in a future episode.
There you go.
Right.
Yeah. Might be some cultural lessons there.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, but thank you guys so much. What a treat.
All right, Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank you all for listening to today's episode of 10X Your Team with Camden and Otis, and a special thanks to our guest, Kendall Wallace, for joining us today. Remember, you can watch full episodes of the show on YouTube at 10X Your Team. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to pass along to other lifelong learners in your tribe so they can enjoy it too. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. As always, the full archive of episodes available at www.10xyourteam.net. Thanks again. We'll see you all next time.